It was precisely 2:14 p.m. on a bleak, rain-swept Tuesday when Dominic Reed's meticulously curated double life began to violently unravel. At that exact moment, he was hidden away in the velvet-draped corner booth of l'Orangerie, swirling a $400 glass of Cabernet and laughing as his mistress, Vanessa, traced the rim of her crystal flute. He felt invincible, a titan of industry who had successfully compartmentalized a pregnant wife at home and a stunning lover in the city. But 3 miles away, in the sterile, glass-walled lobby of his own architectural firm, a breathless courier had just dropped off a heavy, legal-sized manila envelope. Inside were not just divorce papers, but the absolute, calculated destruction of his entire empire. Dominic Reed was a man who believed he held the world on a string. At 42, he was the senior partner at Reed & Associates, one of Chicago's most aggressive and lucrative commercial real estate development firms. He had the sharp jawline, the custom Italian suits, and the blinding charisma that made investors empty their pockets and competitors sweat. Sitting across from him, in the dimly lit, exclusive dining room of l'Orangerie, was Vanessa Kensington. Vanessa was a 28-year-old art consultant with raven hair, a sharp wit, and a moral compass that pointed only toward luxury. She was everything Dominic felt he deserved at this stage in his life, a reward for his high-stakes stress, a secret indulgence that made him feel alive. "You're not even listening to me, Dom," Vanessa purred, leaning across the white tablecloth. Her fingers, adorned with a diamond tennis bracelet he had purchased 3 weeks prior, lightly brushed his knuckles. "I was saying that the gallery opening on Thursday is going to be packed. Are you sure you can slip away?" Dominic offered a confident, easy smile, the kind that usually disarmed anyone in his path. "I told you, it's handled. Callie has a prenatal yoga retreat thing, or maybe it's a birthing class. Honestly, I lose track. She's 6 months along now. All she does is sleep, decorate the nursery, and complain about her swollen ankles. I'll tell her I have a late dinner with the zoning board. I'm always at the zoning board." Vanessa laughed, a soft, melodic sound that stroked his ego perfectly. "Poor Callie. It must be so exhausting being your wife." "She has nothing to complain about," Dominic replied, a flicker of defensive pride in his voice. "She lives in a $6 million brownstone in Lincoln Park. She has a platinum card with no limit. She's carrying my son. She is perfectly safe, perfectly comfortable, and perfectly oblivious." He truly believed it. In Dominic's mind, he wasn't a villain. He was merely a successful man who required different things from different women. Callie, his wife of 7 years, was the foundational rock. She was soft-spoken, intelligent, and nurturing, the perfect mother for his future heir. But lately, her pregnancy had made her tired and distant. The romance had been replaced by discussions about pediatricians, organic paint for the nursery walls, and the logistics of baby-proofing a multi-level home. Vanessa, on the other hand, was adrenaline. She was expensive dinners, illicit weekend trips to Aspen, masked as business conferences, and passionate afternoons in the Gold Coast penthouse he rented under a shell corporation specifically for their rendezvous. Dominic took a slow sip of his Cabernet, savoring the rich, oaky finish. He looked at his platinum Rolex. It was 2:30 p.m. He had another hour to kill before he needed to return to the office and play the role of the dedicated CEO. He felt a profound sense of satisfaction. The economy was booming. His firm was about to close a 9-figure deal on a downtown skyscraper, and he was currently enjoying the company of a beautiful woman while his wife safely nested at home. He had no idea that while he was savoring his wine, his loyal executive assistant, Thomas Wright, was staring at a manila envelope on his mahogany desk with a mixture of profound dread and quiet vindication. Thomas had worked for Dominic for 5 years. He knew where the bodies were buried. He booked the flights to Aspen. He bought the tennis bracelets and expensed them as client gifts. He also liked Callie. Callie was the one who had sent Thomas a massive gift basket when his mother was in the hospital, and she was the one who always asked how he was doing with genuine interest. Thomas had spent the last 8 months feeling nauseous every time he had to lie to Callie on the phone, telling her Dominic was in a meeting when he was actually halfway across town at Vanessa's penthouse. When the courier had shoved the thick, sealed envelope into Thomas's hands, requiring a direct signature, Thomas had glanced at the return address. Foster and Associates, Family Law. Thomas's breath hitched. Benjamin Foster was not just a lawyer. He was the most ruthless, bloodthirsty divorce attorney in the state of Illinois. He was the man you hired when you didn't just want half, you wanted everything, including the marrow in your spouse's bones. Thomas looked at the envelope. It was heavy. Too heavy for just a standard dissolution of marriage. This was a tactical strike. Thomas carefully placed the envelope squarely in the center of Dominic's pristine glass desk, perfectly aligned with his Mont Blanc pen. The bomb was planted. All Dominic had to do was walk in and open it. To understand the sheer magnitude of the trap Dominic was walking into, one had to rewind exactly 84 days. Callie Reed was not the naive, swollen-ankled housewife Dominic perceived her to be. Before she married Dominic, Callie had been a senior forensic accountant for a top-tier auditing firm. She had given up her grueling 80-hour work weeks when they decided to start a family, transitioning into managing their personal portfolio and philanthropic endeavors. Dominic, blinded by his own arrogance, had forgotten that his wife made her living finding hidden money. 84 days ago, Callie was sitting in her sunlit home office, a mug of decaf tea cooling beside her laptop. She had been reconciling their quarterly expenses, a mundane task she usually breezed through. But a discrepancy caught her eye. It was small, a recurring monthly transfer of $8,500 to an LLC named Blue Horizon Consulting. Dominic had hundreds of vendors and shell companies for his real estate projects, but Callie's mind was trained to spot anomalies. The routing number traced back to a small community bank, not the massive commercial banks Dominic usually leveraged. Curiosity piqued, Callie dug deeper. She spent the next 6 hours going down a rabbit hole of digital breadcrumbs. She cross-referenced IP addresses, pulled public property records, and analyzed credit card statements. By midnight, while Dominic was supposedly flying back from a conference in Seattle, Callie had unraveled the entire tapestry of his deception. Blue Horizon Consulting was the shell company Dominic used to pay the lease on a luxury penthouse in the Gold Coast. She didn't cry immediately. The shock was too absolute, a cold, paralyzing venom that froze her veins. She sat in the dark, her hands resting protectively over her slightly rounded belly, feeling the faint, fluttering kicks of her unborn son. The next morning, she hired a private investigator named George Finch. Over the next 3 weeks, Finch provided her with a devastating portfolio. High-resolution photos of Dominic and Vanessa, restaurant receipts, hotel logs. But worst of all, Finch uncovered how Dominic was funding his double life. Dominic wasn't just using personal funds. He was siphoning money from his firm's operational budget, inflating contractor invoices on their new commercial build, and funneling the excess into offshore accounts to maintain his illusion of infinite wealth for both his wife and his mistress. He was committing corporate fraud. It was in that moment, sitting in Finch's dingy office, looking at wire transfer receipts, that Callie's heartbreak transmuted into something cold, hard, and utterly terrifying. absolute resolve. Most women would have confronted him. They would have thrown his clothes on the lawn, screamed until their voices gave out, and demanded answers. Callie did none of that. She knew Dominic. He was a master manipulator. If she confronted him, he would gaslight her, move the money, and drag the divorce out for years in court, using his high-powered corporate lawyers to bleed her dry. Instead, Callie smiled. She played the part of the tired, glowing, pregnant wife. She let him rub her feet and tell her he loved her. She listened to his lies about late-night zoning meetings and simply kissed his cheek, telling him not to work too hard. Behind his back, she orchestrated a masterpiece. She quietly hired Benjamin Foster. Together, they spent 2 months building an airtight, inescapable cage. Callie used her forensic accounting skills to legally compile a staggering dossier of Dominic's financial crimes. She secured her own assets. She quietly transferred sentimental items out of the house into a secure storage unit. She even preemptively spoke to the board members of Reed and Associates under the guise of estate planning, subtly ensuring they would side with her when the truth came out. On the morning of the Tuesday the papers were delivered, Callie woke up early. She made Dominic his favorite espresso. She tied his silk tie for him, smoothing the lapels of his suit. "Have a good day at the office, honey," she had said, her voice steady and warm. "I have a lot of errands to run today." "Don't overexert yourself, Callie. The baby," Dominic had replied, kissing her forehead with a patronizing pat. "I'll be late tonight. Dinner with the investors." "I know," Callie whispered. "I'll be fine." The moment Dominic's Mercedes pulled out of the driveway, Callie sprang into action. She didn't have errands. She had movers waiting 3 blocks away. Within 4 hours, her clothes, her personal documents, and every single item she had purchased for the nursery were packed into a truck. By 2 p.m., she was sitting in a first-class seat on a flight to Boston, where her parents lived, and where she had secretly purchased a beautiful, secluded home under her maiden name. She was sipping sparkling water, feeling the weight of the last 7 years lift off her shoulders. At 2:14 p.m., as Dominic laughed with Vanessa, Callie's plane broke through the cloud cover, ascending into the clear blue sky. Dominic strutted back into the lobby of Reed and Associates at 3:15 p.m. He smelled faintly of expensive steak, Vanessa's Tom Ford perfume, and arrogance. He tossed his umbrella to the receptionist with a charismatic wink and marched toward his corner office. Thomas was standing nervously by the filing cabinets outside Dominic's door. "Any fires I need to put out, Tom?" Dominic asked, not really caring about the answer as he pushed open his heavy glass door. "Just a package for you, sir. Marked highly confidential. I put it on your desk," Thomas said, his voice unusually tight. Dominic barely registered the tone. "Great. Hold my calls for the next 20 minutes. I need to review the structural reports for the downtown project." The door clicked shut behind him. The office was dead silent, save for the soft hum of the city traffic 50 floors below. Dominic walked to his desk, loosening his tie. He saw the thick manila envelope sitting perfectly in the center of his blotter. Foster and Associates, family law. Dominic's brow furrowed. He didn't know a Foster. He certainly didn't need family law services. Perhaps it was a misdirected parcel for one of the junior partners. He slid his silver letter opener through the flap and pulled out the thick stack of documents. The cover page was printed in stark, uncompromising black ink. In the Circuit Court of Cook County, Illinois petition for dissolution of marriage, Callie J. Reed, petitioner, versus Dominic A. Reed, respondent. Dominic stopped breathing. The air in the room suddenly felt thin, as if the oxygen had been vacuumed out. His eyes darted over the words again and again, refusing to process the information. Callie? No. Impossible. Callie was at home, looking at paint swatches. Callie didn't know the first thing about divorce lawyers. This was a prank. It had to be a sick, twisted prank. His hands began to tremble as he flipped to the second page. It wasn't a prank. It was a slaughter. Callie wasn't just asking for a divorce. She was filing for sole physical and legal custody of their unborn child. But that was just the standard boilerplate. It was the attached exhibits that made the blood drain entirely from Dominic's face, leaving him a sickening shade of grey. Exhibit A. Financial disclosures. There, neatly itemized in Callie's meticulous formatting, was every single secret he thought he possessed. Item 1. Lease agreement for 440 Gold Coast Drive, Penthouse B, occupant Vanessa Kensington, $12,500 per month. Item 2. Diamond tennis bracelet, purchased April 12th, $24,000. Item 3. Weekend retreat to Aspen, Colorado, February 14th to 17th, $18,000. How? Dominic whispered to the empty room. How the hell? He flipped frantically to Exhibit B. It was titled, Fraudulent Diversion of Corporate Assets. Dominic's stomach violently heaved. He had to grab the edge of his mahogany desk to keep his knees from buckling. Callie hadn't just found the Mistress. She had found the stolen company funds. She had tracked the inflated invoices from the steel suppliers. She had the routing numbers to his Cayman Island accounts. In a perfectly worded, legally binding paragraph, Benjamin Foster outlined that Callie Reed had already submitted a preliminary report of these financial irregularities to the Securities and Exchange Commission, as well as the internal board of Reed and Associates, to protect her own liability as a spouse. She hadn't just filed for divorce. She had legally and systematically burned his career to ash. Panic, raw and primal, finally shattered his paralysis. Dominic lunged for his desk phone. He practically smashed the buttons dialing his home number. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Then, the automated voice of the carrier clicked on. The number you have reached has been disconnected, or is no longer in service. No, 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 Dominic muttered, sweat breaking out on his forehead. He snatched his cell phone from his pocket and dialed Callie's mobile. It went straight to voicemail. Hi, this is Callie. Leave a message. Callie, pick up the phone, Dominic shouted into the receiver, his voice cracking with a pathetic desperation he hadn't felt since he was a child. Whatever this is, we can fix it. Please, just talk to me. Call me back immediately. He threw the phone onto the desk. He needed to get home. He needed to physically stand in front of her, use his charm, manipulate her, beg her, whatever it took to stop this freight train before it derailed his life completely. He sprinted out of his office, startling Thomas. Cancel everything, Dominic roared, not even waiting for the elevator, shoving open the heavy door to the emergency stairwell. It took him 20 minutes to drive home, breaking every speed limit on Lakeshore Drive, his mind spinning in a chaotic loop of denial and terror. She can't do this. I'll destroy her in court. I'll take the baby. I'll hide the money. But deep down, beneath the raging ego, he knew Callie. If Callie had fired the gun, it meant she had already ensured the bullet would hit him directly between the eyes. He pulled into the driveway of their Lincoln Park brownstone. It looked exactly the same. The hydrangeas were blooming. The elegant brickwork stood proud. Dominic fumbled with his keys, practically tearing the front door off its hinges as he burst into the foyer. Callie, he bellowed, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. Silence. The kind of profound, hollow silence that only exists in an empty house. He ran into the living room. Her favorite cashmere throw was missing from the sofa. He took the stairs 2 at a time, bursting into the master bedroom. Her closet doors were wide open. Her side, usually filled with neat rows of designer dresses and maternity wear, was entirely stripped bare. Only empty velvet hangers remained, swaying slightly from the draught of the open door. Breathing heavily, his chest heaving, Dominic walked slowly down the hall to the nursery. They had spent weeks painting it, a soft sage green. He pushed the door open. The crib was gone. The rocking chair was gone. The changing table, the stuffed animals, the tiny folded clothes, all of it vanished. In the center of the empty room, sitting perfectly square on the hardwood floor, was a single, small item. Dominic walked over on trembling legs and looked down. It was the ultrasound picture of their son, taken at 20 weeks. The one Dominic had supposedly missed because he was stuck in traffic, while he was actually in bed with Vanessa. Clipped to the ultrasound was a small, handwritten note on Callie's personalized stationery. Dominic fell to his knees, the expensive fabric of his suit pants tearing against the wood, and picked up the note. His vision blurred as he read her neat, precise handwriting. "I hope the zoning board meetings were worth it, Dominic. You built a beautiful house of cards, but you forgot who balances the books. Do not try to find me. My lawyers will handle everything from here. Goodbye." Dominic stared at the word goodbye. The silence of the empty house pressed against his eardrums until it roared. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, hoping with irrational desperation that it was Callie. It was an automated calendar reminder. Drinks with Vanessa at the Oak Room, 6 p.m. For the first time in his life, Dominic Reed realized he was completely, utterly, and hopelessly ruined. And the most terrifying part was knowing that the destruction had only just begun. Dominic Reed did not sleep that Tuesday night. He paced the cavernous, echoing halls of the Lincoln Park brownstone, his footsteps swallowed by the plush carpets Callie had painstakingly selected. He drank half a bottle of scotch, not to savor it, but to numb the mounting terror that was clawing at his throat. By 6 a.m., the alcohol had worn off, leaving behind a pounding headache and a cold, sharp realization. He had to get ahead of the narrative. He showered, shaved with trembling hands, and strapped on his platinum Rolex. He chose a charcoal bespoke suit, the kind of armor a man wears when he intends to go to war. If Callie wanted to play dirty, he would show her why he was the most feared negotiator in Chicago commercial real estate. She was a pregnant woman acting out of emotional hysteria. He was a titan. He would hire a shark to counter Benjamin Foster. He would freeze their joint accounts, and he would manipulate the firm's board into burying the financial discrepancies. He pulled his Mercedes into the VIP underground garage of Reed and Associates at 7:30 a.m., aiming to corner his partners before the rumor mill began churning. He walked up to the private executive elevator and swiped his keycard. The small digital screen flashed red. Access denied. Dominic frowned, swiping it again. Access denied. Damn magnetic strips, he muttered, aggressively pressing the call button for the security desk. A moment later, the heavy metal door to the garage opened, and 2 uniformed security guards stepped through. Behind them was Thomas Wright, Dominic's assistant, looking pale and deeply uncomfortable. "Thomas, my card is malfunctioning. Have building management issue me a new one immediately," Dominic snapped, his patience already frayed to a wire. Thomas didn't move toward the elevator. He swallowed hard, clutching a manila folder to his chest. "Mr. Reed, I can't do that. You've been locked out of the system." Dominic's eyes narrowed. "What the hell are you talking about? I own 30% of this firm. Open the elevator." "I was instructed to escort you directly to conference room A," Thomas said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Davis and Miss Croft are waiting for you." A cold sweat broke out on the back of Dominic's neck. George Davis and Fiona Croft were the founding partners. They were usually in London this time of year. If they were sitting in Conference Room A at 7:30 in the morning, the blast radius of Callie's package was moving faster than he could have ever anticipated. Dominic allowed himself to be escorted up the freight elevator, his pride violently bristling at the indignity. When the doors opened to the 50th floor, the bullpen was entirely empty. The silence was deafening. He pushed open the heavy glass doors of Conference Room A. George Davis, a formidable man in his 60s with eyes like chipped flint, sat at the head of the long mahogany table. Fiona Croft, sharp, pragmatic, and utterly ruthless, sat to his right. In the center of the table sat a replica of the exact same thick envelope Dominic had received the day before. "Take a seat, Dominic," George said. It was not a request. Dominic remained standing, projecting an aura of indignation. "I don't know what kind of stunt my estranged wife is trying to pull, George, but I assure you, this is a private domestic dispute that has spilled over. I am handling it." Fiona offered a humorless, razor-thin smile. "A private domestic dispute? That is a fascinating way to describe $4.2 million in embezzled corporate funds, Dominic." The air left Dominic's lungs. "Those are baseless allegations. Callie is a vindictive woman who—" "Stop talking!" George barked, his voice echoing off the glass walls. "Do not insult our intelligence. We spent the entire night on the phone with our forensic auditors and external legal counsel. Your wife didn't just make allegations, Dominic. She provided the receipts. She provided the shell company registrations. She provided the wire transfers to Blue Horizon Consulting and the offshore accounts in the Caymans. She tracked the inflated invoices for the structural steel on the riverfront project down to the penny." Fiona leaned forward, resting her perfectly manicured hands on the table. "You used our operating capital to fund a penthouse for a 28-year-old art consultant. You forged our signatures on expenditure approvals. You exposed this entire firm to catastrophic liability. And worst of all, your wife sent a preliminary disclosure of these findings to the SEC. They are already investigating." Dominic's knees finally gave out. He sank into the leather chair opposite them, his charcoal suit suddenly feeling like a straitjacket. "I can replace the funds. I have equity. I have the liquid assets. We can quietly balance the ledgers before the SEC digs too deep." "You don't have liquid assets anymore, Dominic," Fiona stated coldly. "Benjamin Foster filed an emergency ex parte motion at 8 a.m. yesterday. All of your personal and joint accounts are frozen pending the divorce litigation due to the high flight risk and the nature of the financial fraud. You can't even buy a cup of coffee without a judge's permission." Dominic stared at her, the horrific reality of Callie's masterstroke finally locking into place. She hadn't just left him. She had financially decapitated him. She had systematically cut off every single avenue of escape before he even knew he was in danger. George slid a sleek, black leather folio across the polished wood of the table. "This is a separation agreement. You are resigning, effective immediately, citing personal health reasons. You are surrendering your 30% equity in the firm to cover the exact amount of the embezzled funds, plus the punitive damages we will incur handling the SEC fallout. In exchange, we will not press criminal charges for the corporate fraud." "You're stealing my company from me," Dominic whispered, his voice cracking. "My life's work." "No, Dominic," George replied, his tone entirely devoid of sympathy. "You stole from us to play sugar daddy. Sign the papers, or we call the federal authorities right now, and you leave this building in handcuffs. Your choice." For 10 excruciating minutes, the only sound in the room was the ticking of the wall clock. Dominic looked at the documents. He looked at his partners, who stared back with the cold detachment of executioners. He picked up the Mont Blanc pen that had been provided and signed his name, effectively signing away a decade of his life, his reputation, and his fortune. "Thomas will escort you out," Fiona said, not even looking up as she pulled the signed documents toward her. "Your personal effects will be boxed and shipped to an address of your choosing. Do not contact any of our clients." Dominic walked out of the building, a ghost. The booming economy, the 9-figure deals, the corner office. It was all gone. As he stood on the bustling Chicago sidewalk, rain beginning to mist in the freezing air, he realized he had only one safe harbor left. He reached into his pocket, bypassed the useless, frozen platinum cards, and pulled out the brass key to the Gold Coast penthouse. He needed Vanessa. He needed her to tell him he was still a king, even without his kingdom. The penthouse at 440 Gold Coast Drive was a monument to Dominic's hubris. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic, God's-eye view of Lake Michigan. White marble floors reflected the soft, ambient lighting, and modern art pieces, selected by Vanessa, paid for by Dominic, adorned the walls. When Dominic unlocked the door at 11 a.m., the apartment smelled of expensive espresso and bergamot. Vanessa was standing in the sprawling, open-concept kitchen, wearing a silk robe, sipping coffee while scrolling through her phone. "Dom?" she asked, her perfectly arched eyebrows drawing together in surprise. "What are you doing here? You never come here in the morning. I thought you had a board meeting." Dominic closed the door and leaned against it, his tailored suit rumpled, his face haggard and grey. The facade was entirely broken. "I was fired, Vanessa." Vanessa froze, the coffee cup hovering inches from her lips. "What? What do you mean? Fired? You're a senior partner." "Callie," Dominic choked out, walking over to the marble island and gripping the edge to steady his shaking hands. "Callie knew everything. She hired a private investigator. She found out about us. She found out about the penthouse. She emptied the house, took the baby, and filed for divorce." Vanessa's expression shifted, but it wasn't a look of empathetic horror. It was a swift, calculating sharpening of her features. "She knows about me. Does her lawyer have my name?" "That's the least of our problems," Dominic said, desperate for her to close the distance, to wrap her arms around him, and offer the intoxicating comfort he had grown addicted to. "She found out how I was paying for this place. The company funds. She told my partners. They forced me out, Vanessa. I had to surrender my equity to stay out of federal prison. Benjamin Foster froze all my accounts. I have nothing. I'm completely locked out." Vanessa slowly lowered her coffee cup, the porcelain clinking sharply against the marble countertop. The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. She didn't move toward him. Instead, she took a deliberate step back, crossing her arms over her silk robe. "Frozen," she repeated, her voice dropping an octave, losing its usual musical lilt. "What do you mean, frozen? For how long?" "Months, maybe years until the divorce is settled," Dominic pleaded, reaching a hand out across the island. "But it's going to be okay. I'm brilliant. I can rebuild. I'll consult. We just need to weather the storm. We still have this place for the month, and we have each other." Vanessa looked at his outstretched hand, then up at his desperate, crumbling face. A harsh, cynical laugh escaped her lips. "Dom, are you out of your mind?" she asked, her tone laced with a sudden, chilling pragmatism. "Do you honestly think I'm going to stick around for a bankruptcy and a messy, public divorce where I get dragged through the mud as the home-wrecking mistress?" Dominic recoiled as if he had been physically struck. "Vanessa, I did this for us. I took those risks to give you the life you wanted. I lost my wife for you." "You didn't lose your wife for me," Vanessa snapped, her eyes turning entirely cold. You lost your wife because you were careless and arrogant. And you didn't do it for me, Dominic. You did it for your own ego. You wanted to feel like a god who could have his cake and eat it too. Well, the cake is poisoned, and I am not taking a bite. She turned on her heel and walked briskly toward the master bedroom. What are you doing? Dominic demanded, rushing after her. Vanessa was already pulling 3 massive Louis Vuitton suitcases from the top shelf of the walk-in closet. I'm packing. The lease on this place is in the name of your shell company, which means the moment the auditors come knocking, this asset is getting seized. I'm not going down with your sinking ship. You're leaving me. Now, after everything I've bought you, Dominic yelled, his desperation morphing into a pathetic, venomous rage. That tennis bracelet on your wrist cost $24,000. Vanessa paused, unfastening the diamond bracelet with one hand. She tossed it onto the plush duvet cover. It landed with a soft, muted thud. Take it. Sell it. Pay your lawyer, because from the sound of this Benjamin Foster guy, you're going to need a miracle. She didn't even look at him as she began throwing her designer clothes into the luggage. I suggest you leave, Dominic. I'm calling a car to take me to the airport in an hour. I have a friend in Miami who has been begging me to visit. I think it's time I took him up on it. Dominic stood in the doorway of the bedroom, entirely paralyzed. In less than 24 hours, the grand, immaculate architecture of his life had been systematically demolished. He was standing in a penthouse he no longer owned, watching the woman he thought adored him pack her bags without shedding a single tear. He was utterly, utterly alone. 2 weeks later, the reality of Callie's tactical genius became a suffocating daily nightmare. Dominic was sitting in the cramped, aggressively beige office of Robert Hughes, a mid-tier divorce attorney who was the only one willing to take his case on a retainer funded by the sale of his watch and Vanessa's discarded tennis bracelet. The top-tier lawyers in the city had either conflict of interest clauses tying them to Reed and Associates, or had flatly refused to go up against Benjamin Foster in a fraud-adjacent divorce. They were dialed into a secure video conference for the preliminary asset hearing. On the screen, Benjamin Foster sat in his opulent, dark wood office, radiating the calm, predatory confidence of a great white shark circling a wounded seal, and beside him, sitting poised and glowing, was Callie. She was in Boston. The video feed showed a glimpse of a beautiful, sunlit room behind her, with a roaring fireplace and plush, comfortable furniture. She looked rested. The dark circles that had plagued her during her last weeks in Chicago were gone. Her hair was perfectly styled, and she wore a soft, elegant cream sweater that accentuated her pregnancy. Dominic stared at the screen, a suffocating mixture of longing, rage, and profound regret tightening his chest. "Callie," he breathed, leaning toward the laptop camera. "Callie, please, can we just talk? Privately." Callie didn't flinch. Her eyes, usually so warm and accommodating, met the camera lens with a terrifying, serene emptiness. She didn't see him as her husband anymore. She saw him as a closed account. "Mr. Reed," Benjamin Foster's voice boomed through the speakers, sharp and authoritative. "My client will not be speaking to you today, or any day, unless she is under oath. We are here to establish temporary support and maintain the freeze on the marital estate." "My client has zero income," Robert Hughes interjected, sweating slightly under his cheap suit. "He was forced to resign from his firm. He surrendered his equity. The asset freeze is overly punitive. How is he supposed to live?" Foster smiled, a thin, cruel line. "Your client is a highly educated man with a vast network, Mr. Hughes. I'm sure he can find employment, perhaps in retail or food service. However, the $4 million he embezzled from his firm was marital property, as it was acquired during the marriage and exposed my client to immense liability. We will be seeking an unequal distribution of the remaining estate to compensate for his dissipation of assets on a paramour. Robert Hughes unmuted his microphone and sighed heavily. Your Honor, the petitioner is effectively asking to leave my client destitute. The judge, a no-nonsense woman who had clearly read Callie's meticulous forensic accounting report, leaned into her frame. Mr. Hughes, given the compelling evidence of your client's gross financial misconduct and fraudulent depletion of the marital estate to fund an extramarital affair, the freeze remains in full effect. Furthermore, I am ordering Mr. Reed to pay temporary spousal support and cover the full cost of the petitioner's medical expenses moving forward. He will secure employment within 30 days or be held in contempt. Dominic buried his face in his hands. The gavel struck, a sharp, echoing crack that sounded like the final nail being driven into his coffin. The video feed cut out, leaving the screen black. Dominic was officially trapped in the wreckage he had built. Meanwhile, 1,000 miles away, Callie closed her laptop, took a deep breath of crisp New England air, and placed a hand on her stomach, finally free to build a life entirely on her own terms. While Dominic Reed was suffocating under the weight of his own hubris in Chicago, Callie Stanton, she had legally and swiftly reclaimed her maiden name, was building an empire in the quiet, historic enclave of Beacon Hill, Boston. The contrast between their two realities was as stark as night and day. 6 months had passed since the day the divorce papers were delivered to l'Orangerie. In that time, Dominic's life had become a masterclass in hard karma. Stripped of his equity, his reputation annihilated within the tight-knit commercial real estate community, and his assets entirely frozen by Benjamin Foster's relentless legal maneuvering, Dominic had been forced to face the humiliation he had once reserved for those he deemed beneath him. To avoid being thrown in jail for contempt of court regarding his mandated spousal support, Dominic had to secure employment. But no top-tier firm would touch him. He was a radioactive liability. Eventually, desperate and facing eviction from the cheap motel he had been living in, he took a job as a mid-level leasing agent for a strip mall management company in the sprawling, unglamorous suburbs of Naperville. The man who used to close $90 million downtown high-rises over $400 bottles of wine was now driving a 10-year-old leased sedan and arguing with nail salon owners about broken HVAC units. His bespoke Italian suits hung loosely on his shrinking frame, and the arrogant, blinding charisma that had once been his trademark had dissolved into a perpetual, hollow stare. Callie, however, was thriving in the brilliant light of her freedom. She had used the money she legally secured before the asset freeze to purchase a beautiful 3-story brick townhouse with ivy crawling up the sides. It was warm, secure, and entirely hers. But Callie was not a woman who simply rested on her laurels or relied solely on her divorce settlement. She was a brilliant forensic accountant, and the meticulous takedown of her ex-husband had reignited her passion for her work. 3 months into her new life in Boston, Callie launched Stanton Financial Forensics, a boutique consulting firm specializing in uncovering hidden assets in high-net-worth divorce cases. Her first client was referred to her by Benjamin Foster. Within weeks, Callie had traced millions of dollars a tech CEO had tried to hide in offshore cryptocurrency wallets. Word of her ruthless efficiency and unparalleled discretion spread through the elite legal circles of New England like wildfire. By the time she was 8 months pregnant, she had a waiting list of clients, 3 junior analysts working under her, and a thriving business that generated more legitimate income in a quarter than Dominic had ever made in a year. She had partnered with a sharp, fiercely loyal local attorney named Rebecca Lawson, who helped Callie navigate the business expansion. Rebecca often sat in Callie's sunlit living room, reviewing case files while Callie rested her feet. "You know, Callie," Rebecca said, one brisk October afternoon, looking over a particularly complex tax return they were auditing. "I've seen a lot of women go through what you went through. Most of them break. They spend years in therapy just trying to get out of bed. You turned your heartbreak into a multi-million-dollar forensic firm. It's terrifying, and I am obsessed with it." Callie smiled, resting a hand on her stomach, feeling a strong kick from the baby. "I didn't have the luxury of breaking, Rebecca. He tried to build a life for his mistress using the foundation of my family. He underestimated me because I chose to be quiet, because I chose to support him. He mistook my peace for weakness. I just showed him the math." 2 weeks later, on a crisp, clear Tuesday morning, Callie's water broke. There was no panic. There was no frantic calling of a husband who wouldn't answer his phone. Callie simply called her private driver, picked up the overnight bag she had packed a month prior, and headed to Massachusetts General Hospital. At 4:15 p.m., surrounded by the best medical staff money could buy, Callie gave birth to a healthy, screaming 7-pound baby boy. She named him Liam David Stanton. He had a tuft of dark hair and bright, curious eyes. As she held her son to her chest for the first time, the room quieted. The nurses slipped out to give her a moment of privacy. Callie looked down at Liam, feeling a surge of love so profound and absolute it brought tears to her eyes. She touched his tiny fingers. "It's just you and me, little one," she whispered, kissing his forehead. "And I promise you, no one will ever build a life on our backs again. We are the architects now." In that exact moment, halfway across the country, Dominic Reed was standing in the freezing rain in a suburban parking lot, trying to convince a dry cleaner not to break their commercial lease. He sneezed, pulling up the collar of his cheap, rain-soaked trench coat, entirely unaware that he had just become a father. He had lost the right to know. The legal dissolution of a high-net-worth marriage involving corporate fraud is not a swift process. It took 14 months of agonizing, drawn-out litigation to finally reach the end. 14 months of Dominic's new lawyer, Robert Hughes, desperately trying to salvage pennies from a sinking ship, and 14 months of Benjamin Foster systematically grinding those pennies into dust. The final settlement conference was mandated to be in person. It was held in a private, heavily paneled mediation room at the Cook County Courthouse in downtown Chicago. Dominic arrived early. He looked 10 years older than his 43 years. The sharp jawline was now softened by exhaustion and poor diet. His hair had thinned, heavily threaded with grey, and his posture, once commanding and upright, was permanently slouched, the posture of a man who had been beaten down by the relentless hammer of his own consequences. He wore a suit, but it was off the rack, ill-fitting, and slightly frayed at the cuffs. He sat across from Robert Hughes, staring blankly at the mahogany table, waiting. At precisely 10 a.m., the heavy oak doors opened. Dominic's breath caught in his throat. Callie walked in, and she was a vision of absolute, untouchable power. She wore a tailored emerald green wool coat over a sharp black dress. Her hair was styled in sleek, professional waves. She radiated health, wealth, and an icy, serene confidence. Behind her flanked Benjamin Foster, carrying a single leather briefcase. Dominic couldn't take his eyes off her. The longing hit him so hard it physically ached. He remembered the woman who used to make him espresso, the woman who used to rub his shoulders when he complained about his stress. He had thrown a diamond into the dirt to pick up a shiny rock, and the realization was a suffocating weight on his chest. Callie did not look at him. Not even a glance. She took her seat directly across from him, folded her hands perfectly on the table, and looked at the mediator. The terms of the settlement were read aloud, and they were a bloodbath. Due to the egregious nature of Dominic's financial fraud, specifically his unauthorized diversion of marital assets to fund an extramarital affair, and the massive liability he had exposed the marital estate to, the judge had awarded Callie an unprecedented 85% of the remaining liquid assets. Furthermore, because Dominic had proven himself a profound flight risk with a history of hiding money in offshore accounts, Callie was granted sole physical and legal custody of Liam. Dominic was granted supervised visitation rights, 4 hours every other weekend in the state of Massachusetts, at his own travel expense. Then came the child support and alimony. Benjamin Foster had successfully argued that Dominic's current, pathetic income as a strip mall leasing agent was a voluntary underemployment designed to avoid paying his fair share. The judge agreed. Dominic's monthly payments to Callie were calculated based on his historical earning capacity as a senior partner. The number was astronomical. It meant that every single month, for the next 18 years, Dominic would be handing over nearly 80% of his current meager paycheck just to stay out of jail. He would be living on the absolute precipice of poverty for the rest of his natural working life. "Mr. Reed," the mediator said softly, sliding the thick stack of final decree papers across the table. "Do you understand the terms outlined in this agreement?" Dominic looked at the papers. His hands shook violently as he reached for the pen. He looked up, his eyes glassy and pleading, locking on to Callie for the first time. "Callie, please!" His voice broke, a pathetic, raspy whisper. "I have nothing. I live in a studio apartment above a laundromat. I eat canned soup. I haven't even met my son. Haven't you punished me enough? Please, just let me breathe." Callie finally met his gaze. Her eyes, once warm pools of brown, were entirely flat. There was no anger left in them. There was no hatred. There was simply nothing at all. He meant nothing to her. "You did this to yourself, Dominic," she said, her voice perfectly even, carrying in the quiet room like the tolling of a bell. "You sat in expensive restaurants with another woman, drinking wine paid for with stolen money, while I sat at home carrying your child. You built a cage of lies, and now you are simply locking the door from the inside. Sign the papers." A heavy, suffocating silence descended on the room. Dominic realized then that there was no mercy coming. There was no redemption arc for him. He had played a dangerous, arrogant game, and the quiet woman he had underestimated had checkmated him in 4 moves. He lowered his head, the last remnants of his massive ego shattering into dust, and signed his name on the dotted line. 10 minutes later, Callie walked out of the courthouse and into the crisp Chicago air. A sleek black town car was waiting at the curb. The driver immediately opened the door for her. Dominic trailed out behind her, stopping on the top of the courthouse steps. He watched as Callie paused before getting into the car. She pulled out her phone, her face instantly breaking into a radiant, genuine smile as she looked at a photo on her screen. Undoubtedly a picture of their son. She typed a quick message, slipped the phone into her designer bag, and stepped into the luxury vehicle. The door closed with a solid, expensive thud. The car pulled away, merging seamlessly into the bustling city traffic, disappearing from his sight forever. Dominic Reed stood alone on the concrete steps as a cold wind blew off Lake Michigan, chilling him to the bone. He pulled his thin coat tighter around his shoulders, turned his back to the city he used to rule, and began the long, quiet walk toward the train station, completely destroyed by the exact karma he had so desperately earned. And that is the absolute reality of hard karma. Dominic believed he was untouchable, a man who could manipulate the world, his business, and the women in his life without ever facing the bill. but he made the fatal mistake of underestimating a quiet, intelligent woman. Callie didn't need to scream, she didn't need to throw his clothes out the window, and she certainly didn't need to fight his mistress. She simply let his own arrogance be the weapon of his total destruction. It's a powerful reminder. Never mistake a person's silence for ignorance, and never assume you are the smartest person in the room just because you are the loudest. The truth always balances the ledgers in the end.